I've had a fascination for churches for as long as I can remember. For me, not necessarily the religious pull, but the peace and tranquility and the huge array of artifacts to discover. What I didn't appreciate, however, was the technicalities required to take a good picture of a church. Under the guidance of Philip, I've started to learn some of the skills required. To help me improve my skills, and during the bad weather last winter, I decided that I wanted to photograph some local churches. I did some research on the internet and found that Tunbridge Wells Borough Council produced a leaflet called On the Wealden Churches Trail, which lists the 13 most interesting churches in and around Tunbridge Wells. Over the winter, therefore, I made it my mission to visit as many of them as I could. There were challenges as some of the churches are less accessible in terms of opening times than others, so I have not been able to visit all of them, but the presentation that follows is the results of my endeavours, which I hope you will enjoy. All of the shots are exposure bracketed to capture details in both the windows and the shadows, and were all taken on a tripod. My trail started at All Saints Church in Brenchley. The church was originally built in 1213 in the early English style. It is made of local sandstone. The east window was made by the firm of Morris & Co., whilst the windows in the north and south sanctuary were designed by the influential arts and crafts artist Robert Anning Bell. It is uncommon to see Bell's work in the southeast of England. You will also see in the south aisle windows an unusual depiction of a local family, the Hookers, prominent parishioners who made their money from sugarcane and sugar beet, and the cane and beet can be seen clearly represented in the stained glass. There is a view from the graveyard south across the Tees Valley, which has been recounted by the war poet Siegfried Sassoon. From there I headed just down the road to St Margaret's Church in Horseman Den. The church was built in the 14th century. It is a very isolated church, some way outside of what is now the village centre, and it is purported that this was because it was a plague church whose villagers moved away after the outbreak. The church became the family church of Jane Austen's ancestors, who lived in the parish and were wealthy cloth traders. The churchyard contains some of their tombs. Next stop was St Mary's in Geldhurst. A large 13th century sandstone church with aisles to the naves and side chapels in the chancel. The church has been altered and restored many times over the centuries. The 115 feet tall spire and the tower were destroyed by lightning in 1637, but rebuilt the following year in a Gothic style. The churchyard itself has some interesting history. It was the site of a memorable event, the Battle of Geldhurst, where the notorious smugglers, the Hawkhurst gang, were defeated. St Mary's contains a superb collection of monuments to the great and good of the past. The most extraordinary are the two 16th century wooden effigies of the Culpepers, a politically powerful family whose local iron foundries made the guns with which Drake's navy defeated the Armada. The monument is one of very few examples of wooden effigies in the country. From there I headed to the much anticipated Christ Church in Kilndown. I have seen many pictures of the inside of this church, and I have to say it didn't disappoint. From the outside, the only real clue from the exterior to what lies inside the church is the tomb to the right of the entrance path. The church was transformed to its current Gothic revival splendour by Alexander Beresford Hope, the stepson of Viscount Beresford, one of Wellington's generals. This little church has subsequently influenced the design and decoration of many across the world. There is an extensive set of stained glass windows. Most were by German stained glass designer Franz Xaver Egert and depict the Virgin Mary with Christ in her arms, Saints Peter and Paul, and various saints associated with Britain. Next stop was St Dunstan's in Cranbrook. St Dunstan's is an unusually large church, and for this reason it is nicknamed the Cathedral of the Weald. It owes its size to the wealth generated in the area by the cloth industry in the 14th through to the 16th century. The interior of the church is full of unusual and important features. The clock mechanism was the prototype of Big Ben, and the organ contains parts originally intended for the Crystal Palace. Slightly unusually are several bosses of the Green Man, an ancient pagan figure. Last stop on this leg of the journey was St George's in Benenden. St George's is one of only 4 churches in the Weald that is mentioned in the Domesday Book. The church was rebuilt in 1677 following a great fire which saw all 5 bells within the steeple melted. The church is renowned for containing the tomb of Kitty Fisher of nursery rhyme fame. Another day saw me heading out to St Martin's of Tours in Ashurst, but there I was stumped by a door that I couldn't open, despite visiting during opening hours. So I headed back via St Mary the Virgin of Speldhurst. The original Norman church was rebuilt in the 15th century using money paid as a ransom following the Battle of Agincourt, but that church was in turn replaced in 1791 and again in 1871. Remarkably, a few relics of the old church survive, including the coat of arms of the Duke of Orleans over the south door, a sundial, and the weather vane. The church consists of a nave, a north aisle, a chancel, and a tower, all built in the early English style. The pillars are of great elegance, with fine mouldings. The main reason for visiting St Mary's has to be the spectacular stained glass designed by Burne-Jones and William Morris. The window represents the Virgin Mary, Mother of Jesus Christ, after whom the church is dedicated. Next to her is Elizabeth, her cousin, and mother of John the Baptist. The window dates from 1874. From there, I headed to the last church of my presentation today, and probably one of the most photographed churches in the area, All Saints in Chudleigh. All Saints Church can trace its existence to the Domesday Book, and maybe as far back as the 7th century. However, the most remarkable feature of this church is a 20th century addition. Following the tragic death of their daughter in a sailing accident, Sir Henry and Lady Goldsmith commissioned the Russian-born artist Marc Chagall to design the striking east window. Following the success of its installation, a further 11 windows were designed by the artist and installed at All Saints between 1974 and 1985. Still on the trail leaflet left for me to visit are St Thomas a Becket in Capel and St Peter's Old Church in Pembury, but I have been scuppered by visiting times of both of these. Bayham Abbey is the final church on the list, but for me the attraction of churches are the interiors, and I'm not sure that Bayham Abbey has much to offer in that respect.